When I was a 19-year-old English major at Hiram College, I had a professor named Mary Louise Vincent. She probably belonged to what we might call the old school of English professors. Even back then, as you can imagine, I was obsessed with musical theater as a great American art form, but try as I might, I could not get Dr. Vincent in my corner. She just was an intellectual snob. That's what she was. And she wore it as a badge of honor. Except in one case. The 1950 Broadway musical Guys and Dolls. Now she would say, that's a masterpiece. And her face would light up with a joy that she usually reserved for Shakespeare and Milton. But she would say, there's an extraordinary world created on that stage, a world that is uniquely American.
I got the horse right here, the name is Paul Revere, and here's a guy that says if the weather's clear, can do. This guy says the horse can do. If he says the horse can do.
I'm picking Valentine, cause on the morning line, the guy's got him figured at 5 to 9. But make it FS10, he wins it by a half, according to this here in the Telegraph.
For Paul Revere I'll bite, I hear his foot's all right. Of course it all depends if it's red last night.
I know it's Valentine, the morning works look fine. You know the jockey's brother's a friend of mine.
And just a minute, boys, I got the feedbox noise. It says the great-grandfather was equipoised.
I told you, Paul Revere, now this is no bum steer. It's from a handicapper that's real sincere.
I'm picking Valentine, cause on the morning line, the guy's got him figured at 5 to 9.
So make it FS10, he wins it by a half, according to this here in the Telegraph. FS10,
Paul Revere,
I got the horse right here.
3 gamblers led by Stubby K in the film of Guys and Dolls. I didn't mean to spoil the fun, but I somehow figured that you would not mind seeing that particular clip 2 times, right? I think I'm right about that. So uniquely American, said my college professor. You know, musical theater historian Ethan Morton goes her one better. He calls Guys and Dolls uniquely unique. I think they're both right, and we're going to take a little time to find out why. Now, I know this is supposed to be a preview of the movie of Guys and Dolls, but this is one of those rare instances where Hollywood was pretty loyal to the original Broadway version. So I want to go back and give you a sense of the stage masterpiece that Mary Louise Vincent knew Guys and Dolls was. And I'm going to toss in some stuff about the movie too. But we're going to wait till we get to the Q&A to really talk about what you like and maybe some things that you don't like about the 1955 film. Okay? Okay. Now, Janet Kramer, I know you're out there somewhere. Here's the thing. Wouldn't you be flattered if somebody somewhere described something as Kramer-esque? Sure you would. I mean, what a high compliment that would be. Well, Guys and Dolls is Runyon-esque through and through. And that's a tip of the hat to the man who created the stories on which Guys and Dolls is based. He would be the great Damon Runyon. Runyon spent most of his life in New York City. Where else? He was a journalist, he was a sports columnist, and he wrote 6 volumes of short stories. 2 of his stories, The Idol of Miss Sarah Brown, and another story called Pick the Winner, they were the source material for Guys and Dolls. Sadly, he died just 4 years before his characters became the talk of the town on Broadway. But what characters he left us. My friend Stanley Green called them the city's high-minded lowlifes, small-time gamblers and crooks and showgirls with names like Nicely Nicely Johnson, Harry the Horse, Benny South Street, Big Julie, and Miss Adelaide. Runyon took the raw material of what he heard around him, and he invented a kind of slang that I think was strangely elegant and maybe even a little bit poetic. Writer A. Burroughs once said, "These bums act like they've been written by Noel Coward." To put it another way, Damon Runyon's language was, quote-unquote, literary, which is one of the reasons why Dr. Mary Louise Vincent really, really liked it. For example, here's his description in one of the stories of a character named Feet Samuels. Get a load of this. He is a big, heavy guy with several chins and very funny feet, which is why he is called Feet. These feet are extra large feet, even for a big guy. And Dave the Dude says Feet wears violin cases for shoes. Of course, this is not true because Feet cannot get either of his feet in a violin case unless it is a case for a very large violin, such as a cello. End quote. Vintage Damon Runyon, a glorious explosion of language that's almost always written in the present tense. Very interesting about Runyon. So, who decided to make a musical out of this colorful but unlikely material? Two producers named Cy Feuer and Ernest Martin, who had just had a Broadway hit with their friend Frank Lesser, a 38-year-old composer and lyricist who had mostly worked in Hollywood as a lyric writer. Lesser recalled, "They rang me up, and when I heard Feuer say the magic word Runyon, I was hooked." Native New Yorker Frank was a shoo-in for this musical because, like so many of Runyon's characters, he was a tough guy, but a tough guy with a heart of gold. As he put it in a disarming, self-deprecating way, "I'm in the romance business." But who would write the script? Now, I think this is kind of interesting. Even today when you see the show, these are the credits, presented just this way. Turns out a very good screenwriter named Joe Swirling worked on Guys and Dolls for a few months with Frank, but it was turning out to be too dark, which is what the producers thought they wanted. But now that they saw where the script was headed, they knew it was all wrong. So Swirling was let go, but he had a clause in his contract that said he would always get credit just like that, even though not one of his words remains in Guys and Dolls. So remember this, everybody. Always have a good lawyer. Abe Burroughs, a comedy writer for radio, was tapped for the assignment, even though he had never done anything for the theater. But he and Frank had been soulmates for years and made up songs together like The Girl with the Three Blue Eyes. And another one went like this. You haven't got cheeks like roses. You haven't got eyes like stars. Your sigh doesn't sound like music, the music of soft guitars. You haven't got lips like rubies. Your hair doesn't even curl. But baby, it makes no difference to me, 'cause you're not my girl. I don't know of another musical created the way this one was. When Joe Swirling was replaced, Frank had already written a slew of mostly comic songs for the Act One script. Abe Burroughs wrote a new first act built around Frank's songs that had already been written. And then they wrote Act Two together. But the two of them were so committed to writing Runyon-esque dialogue and songs that they emerged with one of the most tightly constructed musicals ever. The thing is, it was all cut from the same cloth, and they took a lot of chances with this show. For example, in most musicals of that time, there was a primary couple that got most of the stage time, like Curly and Lori in Oklahoma, and a secondary couple, like Ado Annie and Will Parker in the same musical. But in this show, there are two parallel romances that are really of equal importance. Sky Masterson and Sarah Brown from the Save a Soul mission. Admittedly, they get most of the romance. Not to be underestimated, though, are Nathan Detroit, who's always looking for a new location for his floating crap game, and showgirl Miss Adelaide. Her last name, by the way, is anybody's guess. Adelaide has been waiting for Nathan at or near the altar for 14 years. She describes herself as the well-known fiancé. All four of them are lovable in their own way, and both of these love stories are believable. So another thing that's surprising about Guys and Dolls is that the characters are not caricatures. All four of the principals actually have some depth. Adelaide's Lament, a person can develop a cult, may be one of the funniest songs ever written for the theater, but it's more than that. Stephen Sondheim has always said that he admires it because there's a real person there, a person with real feelings. In Susan Lesser's wonderful book about her father, she calls the characters of Runyon Land adult delinquents who live with careful enunciation, dignity, and pride, and by an ethical code that transcends street loyalties and expresses, get this, a universal morality. How about that? And there's a welcome diversity among these characters, not as much as we would ask for today, but coming soon after World War II, I think it's still significant. Frank even tosses in a little Yiddish in the songs. For example, echt with poise, meaning authentic, and so new, spelled N-U, meaning so now. By the way, in 1976, there was a terrific Broadway revival of this musical featuring an all-black cast who made Runyon's slang work delightfully well. There's much more being lived in this story, I think, than the spirit of any one culture. And interesting that although the guys are hip, they're also a bit old-fashioned. As Susan Lesser says, they honor their codes of behavior and want nothing to do with conformity. Even Sky Masterson is way outside the mainstream. But 10 years later, Abe Burrows and Frank Lesser wrote another hit show that actually satirized conformity, How to Succeed in Business Without Really Trying. They won a Pulitzer Prize for that one, or as Frank called it, his Putzler. In 1950, the original production of Guys and Dolls was directed by a Broadway legend, George S. Kaufman, as in Kaufman and Hart. Kaufman was not a big fan of musicals, unless it was one this unusual. His choreographer, the brilliant Michael Kidd, who wanted to stage a second-act crapshooters ballet in the sewer. Really? So, not surprisingly, Kaufman said to his choreographer, Mike, I don't understand. Do you mean to tell me we're going to have a scene where these tough gamblers will be standing around the stage while a bunch of dancers get up and do a dance? But Michael Kidd said, I'll put all the members of the cast into the crap game, even if they're not dancing. I will even have Big Julie rolling. Kaufman said, well, I can't see it. But Michael Kidd worked out the dance, and when Kaufman saw it, though he didn't express any emotion, he admitted It was remarkable. And the great thing is that when you see the film, you get to see Michael Kidd's Crapshooters Ballet preserved for all time. And for both stage and screen, Michael Kidd also did the opening sequence in the show in pantomime. It's going to knock your socks off. Before we leave the Broadway show, I just have to give you a taste of Frank Loesser on camera, because no songwriter who ever worked on Broadway or in Hollywood, nobody was funnier than Frank Loesser was. He just had humor coursing through his veins. So here he is. This was a live TV talk show that was broadcast soon after Guys and Dolls became a smash hit on Broadway that ran, I think, 1,200 performances. The host is wearing peculiar glasses because she has a case of pink eye.
You belong at a piano when you talk about music. Come on, let's go over to the piano.
I'm more comfortable that way.
Well, you ought to be. After all, this is home to you, isn't it, a piano?
Used to be. I haven't done anything with one in a long time. I moved one the other day. Really, I haven't. I don't sing and I don't play. I come to you at a slight handicap, no talent.
Yes, I know. Mr. No Talent.
There's a song I want to play you.
All right.
Oh, I don't know who she was, and I don't know where she came from. I only know there was an angel glow in the eyes of the strange little girl.
Oh, sure. Everybody knows that, but that's not yours.
Didn't write it, but I love it. Oh, I don't know who she was, and I don't. Everybody should buy a copy of that song.
Well, by golly, see that you do, too. Right now, right today. Now, listen, though. I want you to play something of yours for me, will you?
Well, you asked for it. How about, I'd love to get you on a slow boat to China, all to myself.
You know that one? One of the best.
Get you, keep you in my arms evermore. Leave all your lovers, a weeping and a wailing on the faraway shore. A little late, arriving in my lonely world over here. For you have left me, and where is our April of old? You have left us too sad. Oh, I don't know who she was, and I don't know where she came from.
Frank, boy. How about something from Guys and Dolls?
Oh, I'm not allowed to play anything from Guys and Dolls.
Your own music you're not allowed to play?
No, nobody connected with the show is allowed to perform any of it. That's one of the edicts handed down by the producers. Very evil man.
Well, it's a very evil, wonderful man. The only thing about it is, in a way, that does keep it fresh, I suppose, for...
Well, the theory of it is that the people that want to see the people or hear the people connected with the show had jolly well get a $6 ticket.
All right. And listen, they all want
I'd love to do it. Really, they won't let me.
All right. All right. We went.
Oh, I don't know who she was, and I don't know where she came. For laryngitis, that is what is called a sustained.
It's very good. You with your laryngitis, me with my pink eyes.
Sustained injuries. We should get together.
And I'm glad we do.
Okay, a word about the cast of the Broadway Guys and Dolls, and then I promise I'm going to move into the film. But I have to tell you that Robert Alda and Vivian Blaine, playing Sky Masterson and Miss Adelaide, they were stars, but they were not big stars. The point here is that the show was the star. And by the way, Robert Alda was Alan Alda's father. Isabel Bigley was virtually unknown in 1950. It was Sam Levine then 45, who was already a beloved Broadway comic, and Abe Burrows and Frank Loesser actually wrote the part of Nathan Detroit for Sam Levine. He had just the right combination of tough and lovable. He was truly Runyon-esque. The only problem with Sam Levine, the only problem, was that this was a musical and he could not sing. I mean, there have been lots of non-singers on Broadway who have made it work, but poor Sam did not have a musical bone in his body, and a fantastic song written for Nathan and Sky had to be dropped because Levine just could not handle it. For the chorus numbers, Frank told him just to move his lips and not sing. But Nathan Detroit had to have his own kind of love song for Miss Adelaide, right? This was Sue Me. I don't want you to think that I'm exaggerating here. So here is just a little bit of Sam Levine from the original Broadway cast recording.
Sue me, shoot bullets through me. I love you.
Well, don't you think that just makes him a little more endearing? I really do. But the thing is, you have to at least start on the right note. And Sam Levine had so much trouble finding the note for Sue Me. So this is great problem solving in the theater. You know what Frank Loesser did? He created for him a path of 5 notes to get him up there. The 5 notes went, find a lawyer and sue me, what can you do, etc. Close call. Which is a good segue, I think, to get to the film in which everybody sang. Now, Paramount had the right of first refusal to make this movie, but they decided against it. And you know why? Because this was the McCarthy era, and Abe Burrows was on the Hollywood blacklist. Producer Samuel Goldwyn paid a record-breaking $1 million for the screen rights, and he wanted big, huge stars. He got them in both Frank Sinatra playing Nathan Detroit and Marlon Brando as Sky. He let the inimitable Vivian Blaine reprise her by now famous Adelaide, and he gave the Sarah Brown role to another movie star, Gene Simmons. To repeat, even Brando does his own singing, and he does it charmingly. And let us not forget the rotund Stubby Kaye, who played Nicely Johnson on both stage and screen, stopping the show with Sit Down, You're Rockin' the Boat. Stubby, by the way, was a former vaudevillian who was dubbed the extra padded attraction. So here are the 2 big pieces of gossip about this movie, but the thing is, they're both true. Number 1, Frank Loesser was not happy with Frank Sinatra because Sinatra would not take any suggestions from the songwriter, and these 2 hot-tempered artists wound up in a big fight loaded with FUs. Frank Loesser vowed that he was never going to see the movie, and as far as we know, he never saw the movie, and they never spoke to each other again. Number 2, Frank Sinatra was not happy, period. He wanted to play Sky Masterson, but Sam Goldwyn stuck to his guns and cast the movie against type. And I, for one, think that Brando is an amazing Sky Masterson. My friend Loretta says that just the way he holds the dice turns her on. But for 65 years, the controversy has never let up. Should the 2 guys have been cast in reverse? I want you to think about that, because when we get to the Q&A, Bob, Noel, and I, we're going to take a vote. Because, I mean, this is serious business. Well, if you have ever had the privilege of seeing a truly first-class production of this musical on stage, such as the 1992 revival, which made stars of both Nathan Lane and Faith Prince, maybe you will agree with me that the movie version doesn't quite cut it. The thing is, Joseph Mankiewicz had never directed a musical before, and he didn't understand the cinematic rhythms that a Stanley Donen or a Vincent Minnelli did. But when I say that, I feel guilty because it's really carping. 65 years after this movie was made, it remains a gem. And despite all the laughs, this is a very romantic show. The two love stories could hardly be more different, but each one plays out the age-old battle of the sexes brilliantly. And also, I think each story confirms that having someone in your life usually beats being alone. But I want to use the word romantic in its broader sense as well. Hope and optimism are the subtext of this musical. The feeling that the world it portrays is special, the feeling that beneath the surface of a tough guy there beats a tender heart. Very much a post-World War II experience for the audience was this Guys and Dolls. I think there's a kind of smart and sweet fantasy about it that somehow combines with a layer of realism. And that's really hard to pull off. I think that's one reason why Ethan Mordden calls the musical uniquely unique. Certainly, crooks and showgirls today hardly practice their trades as the kind of ladies and gentlemen that we find in this musical. And as one critic writes, this is a double victory for tradition, order, and religion, but I would add, with an ironic little wink given it by Lesser and Burroughs, and certainly by Damon Runyon, who knew that that double victory was not entirely true. That's all I have to say tonight. I didn't want to make this preview too long because if you're going right to the movie, you have a 2.5-hour screening ahead of you. But what a treat to see it again, or even better, to see it for the first time. I'm Bill Rudman.